Episode 58 begins with a cold open that, as is the case with most of Season 3, even further blurs the line between Titan and human conflicts. We have seen Eren fighting other Titans, we have seen Eren fighting other Titan shifters, we've seen the Scouts fighting other people, but what we haven't seen is quote-unquote our side's Titans fighting people. And so this episode, opening with Kruger just casually grabbing one of the guards, is crossing that one final line that we still hadn't crossed. Just a few short episodes later, Eren and Liberio would essentially be playing the role of Annie in Stoas. At this point, the fantasy and the survival aspects of this Titan series are completely thrown to the wayside. Even our side are now using them as just weapons of war. And the narration here, both in the sub as well as the dub, elevates that even further. Grisha, in this cold and shaky voice, says that Kruger squeezed the life out of the guards and threw them into the ocean. And then there's this awkward pause, this odd moment of realization that things that seem completely normal to him are completely alien to Paradis. And so he then mutters,
I suppose I ought to explain what the sea is.
In terms of setting the stage for the insanity that would transpire next, I think this opening is up there with the greats of the series. Grisha having to explain something as basic as this, it's like, yeah, there are things that are just completely out of our understanding, and that's what this episode would be about. Even visually, the sheer juxtaposition between this gorgeous sunset and the cold, completely emotionless brutality on screen is excellent. As for the title of the episode,
進撃の巨人.
Yup, more than halfway through the series, I, along with probably many others, realized that, actually yes, the English title of the series doesn't make any sense. Like, what is Attack on Titan? We're fighting and attacking Titans, sure, but why would anyone ever phrase it like that? Who would ever say, attack on Titan? Who attacks on Titan? What does that even mean? The reason for the very awkward phrasing is because 1, when localization was happening, the Attack Titan still hadn't been revealed. 2, Japanese as just a language is extremely context-reliant, which links to number 3. Shingeki no Kyojin, when translated literally, means everything from just Attack Titan, which also doesn't really make much sense in isolation, to Advanced Titan and Attack on Titans and Attacking Titans, and generally anything else that sort of implies that we are being attacked by Titans. Most likely is just an outcome of the double meaning in the Japanese title, and so localization landed on this slightly more intriguing sounding Attack on Titan. I don't think any localizers, or to be honest with you, any Japanese people might have even entertained the idea of Attack Titan. I think the initial underlying meaning was of attacking Titans or fighting the Titans or something along those lines. Attack on Titan is just a more memorable and stylized version of that. In Japanese though, because it is so context-heavy, all you had to do was just reframe it and the meaning changes completely. Moving into the episode itself, we open with a shot of seagulls in the evening sun. 1, to create a strong association with the sea, aka not Eren's story just yet, and 2, to symbolize their constant fight for freedom that would include Eren in the very next episode. We also see blood streaming from Kruger's nose, just like we saw with Eren before return to Shiganshina. We'll return to this point with the Curse of Ymir, so keep that in mind for now. But the really interesting stuff begins as Kruger properly introduces himself, saying that his name is Eren-Kruger, and that he is the bearer of one of the 9 Titans. For much of this episode, I think the core themes and really core question is one of causality. In this case, the question of, why is Eren named Eren? Kruger did completely change Grisha's life, so the obvious interpretation is that Eren was simply named in honor of Kruger. But considering the events of this episode, as well as Season 4, where Eren chooses the cover name of Kruger, well, it does kind of plant the idea in your mind that Kruger-Eren might actually be named after Eren, as in Eren in the future who isn't even born yet. Admittedly, that is a very big stretch, as his parents shouldn't really be affected by any kind of future memories. Naming him should be a completely independent decision. But then again, his entire family were also revolutionaries, and he clearly inherited the Attack Titan from someone in those same circles. So that ancestry line does go beyond Kruger himself. Most of the time throughout the series, where I go on 3-minute tangents about timey-wimey stuff, it is absolutely overanalyzing. But with this episode, that is very different, because it makes all of that so explicit that I can't help but wonder whether naming Eren, literally Eren, is like the most obvious way of telling you, yeah, they're the same dude, they're influenced by the same memories, they are basically the same person. Getting back on track though, another neat mirroring we see here is Kruger saying that all he needed was a doctor to fake his blood tests, saying that they make for excellent spies. Grisha himself is of course evidence of that, but in Season 4 with Eren, we'd sorta see the reverse. He too is a pseudo-spy, but instead of acting as a doctor, he would be acting as a wounded soldier. And with this too, there is also some twisted irony, because doctors are meant to be good people, right? They're supposed to be healers, helping anyone and everyone with no judgments. But here, they're referred to as great assets of war, ones able to covertly shape things behind the scenes. On Paradis, Grisha would of course use this lesson to a very great extent. And on a similar note, going even further back, Grice, the dude who recruited Grisha in the first place and was turned into a Titan last episode, is of the same Grice family that Colt and Falco would later be. So much like with Grisha, Zeke, and Eren, even the same family would be split right down the middle. It continues to press that question of perspective and tries to ask the question of who started the story. Kruger shares Eren's name. Eldia restorationists are directly related to Marley's elite warriors whose only purpose is to wipe out Eldians. Doctors are secret spies. Who is in the wrong, and how did we even arrive here? Also, the shot of Grisha asking why he is the only one left standing is really cool. I have nothing else to add, it just looks real cool. Another thing I love here is how matter-of-fact Kruger is for this entire sequence, just like we'd see with future Eren and Grisha with the Crystal Catacombs. Throughout the series, we focus a ton on how Eren is the one burdened by the sins of his ancestors, and how Grisha put this impossible weight of the key and the Founding Titan on his shoulders. But the further back we go, the more the story seems to be exactly the same, just with different faces. Which, you know, is exactly what Attack on Titan is all about. Just like Eren, Grisha never wanted any of this. Even right here on the wall, and we'll get to that in a second, he doesn't want the Titan. Though as Kruger collapses, he says that he transformed even women and children, all with the belief that it would help Eldia. In the long run, this of course directly applies to Eren too, best exemplified with the Ramsey conversation. They both did these horrible things that are inexcusable, but they did them with the belief that in the end, it would all be worth it. At the same time though, in Eren's and also Grisha's case, we of course also have the reverse, where they look forward and realize that, no, this is not right, we want to stop it, but they simply can't. And that also raises even more questions about Kruger, because did he ever think the same thing? Did he ever consider just going to Paradis himself? Did he ever try to just stop this some way somehow, but was affected by the memories? We'll never know, but it's interesting to think about. And also, I know this is overanalyzing, but note how the color has left Kruger's eyes. They are now almost entirely grey, while both Grisha's and Eren's are of course still that distinct green. Also, the sound design here is excellent. That almost speeding train motif I think perfectly encapsulates that sense of urgency for Grisha. Kruger then talks about how, if that day hadn't happened, Grisha wouldn't have grown to hate Marley, which again, in the context of this episode, is all about that question of causality. If Grisha never went beyond the wall, was it possible that Eren's story as we know it never happens and that entire fixed loop is just nullified? We'll talk about it a bit later with the Attack Titan. But he then notes that he could see the rage in Grisha's eyes, rage that could engulf the entire world. Eyes in Attack on Titan are a huge focus. Ever since the first episode, we've gotten multiple distinct close-ups on Eren's eyes when he promises to destroy all Titans. Keith too noted that Eren has those daggers in his eyes, just like his father. And there is also a shot of Eren's rage literally engulfing his home. So, like much of the season, he's just pivoting the series away from just a conflict to one that has been inherited and repeated for millennia. And as if that hadn't been clear enough,
Kruger. I said Keith. I don't know why.
Then talks about how his father too was an Eldia restorationist, only, you know, he kinda got roasted. There's also the line of him watching in terror from his hiding place in the closets. You could interpret this as him effectively being just an onlooker in the entire Attack Titan plan, culminating in the rumbling. I will admit, that is a stretch. What I think is more so the point here is that, much like we talked about last episode with Grisha's, that day, be it Grisha or Eren or the Owl or even Ymir, each and every one of them have that day that broke their humanity and set them on a path of destruction. As for how far back that day goes and where did the cycle begin, well, we'll touch on that in just a little bit. Also, I promise I'll try not to mention it like every 3.5 seconds, but the cinematography in this episode is absolutely stunning. Shots like this, for example, they talk about their insignificance in this big plan as we get these sprawling shots where they're just these two small boys in the corner. It's so cool. But with that, it is time for big lore. When Grisha asks Kruger why didn't he just do all of this himself, he begins to explain about the Curse of Ymir. That, of course, being the death of the Titan Shifter 13 years after they've gotten the Titan. Thing is, it is just cool big lore, but that also means that, well, how do I put this? The literal main characters have ticking death timers on them. And so very fittingly, we smash cut to Eren continuing the story in more ways than one. Before we get into the ramifications of all this though, I want to briefly talk about the fairly common belief that all of this is just Marley propaganda and the curse doesn't actually exist. I do think that the idea of it is compelling, and technically, we never actually see anyone directly die from it. But I also think there is an overwhelming amount of evidence pointing toward the curse being a real thing, both in terms of in-universe events as well as purely creative choices. Even in just this episode, we see the toll just a single transformation is having on Kruger's body. Earlier in the season, we saw Yuri walking with a cane, which, shouldn't really be a thing for someone who can literally regenerate. And later in Season 4, Tom too is weakened before he passes on over the Titan to Zeke. Thinking about it from Marley's point of view, it also doesn't really make any sense to willingly give up an already combat-trained and experienced soldier. The Titans are the backbone of their entire army. Get it? Backbone, because the Titan powers are based in this. Okay, I'll shut up. What benefit would there be in constantly gambling on a whole new squad of shifters? You could say that they don't want any of the Titan shifters to become too comfortable and then start getting ideas, but still, I think the benefit of having trained soldiers at the ready is just much better. And even from a thematic point of view, this is also explored with Eren and Historia. The founding Titan version of Eren made it clear that he doesn't want anyone to inherit any of the Titans because they would die. But Historia, being the martyr that she is, deliberately wants to fall on the sword and wants to become the beast. So personally, I think it's meant to be used as a tool to convey this self-destructive cycle rather than deception. I think that's the whole tragedy of the warriors. Because they want their families to have at least something, and also because Marley propaganda is very good, they are literally signing away their life, and not because they're becoming a soldier and that comes with the risk of death. No, they are literally signing up to just have 13 years left. And even from a purely creative point of view, the Ymir flashback deliberately emphasizes things like the 9 petals for the 9 shifters, and the 13 hands for the 13 years. So even there, it also seems legit. TLDR, yes, I think the Curse of Ymir is very much real. Returning to our 2 lads with 1 foot in the grave, Armin very casually notes, I have 13 years to live, and you, not even 8. But Mikasa suddenly cuts them off saying that the information is wrong and that it can't be true. And most importantly, the ever-familiar cold and tactical motif kicks in.
It can't be true.
Let's break this down bit by bit. I mentioned this in passing last time, but I think this whole imprisonment debacle is basically a thing just for Mikasa and not really Eren or Armin. This is about her being locked away from both Eren and Armin, because even if they achieve that freedom that they so desperately crave, both of them are going to die. In the long run, we of course know that just Eren dies, which actually also works because Armin is not actually locked up, only Eren and Mikasa are. I guess to put it in more philosophical terms, I think the Curse of Ymir is not just simple death, but rather the death of love and the bond between the Titan Shifter and their loved ones. That's the Ymir and Mikasa connection that we see here. Ymir never got to see her daughters grow up. She never got to experience actual love. For most of her life, she was just Fritz's war machine, and that's it. Same thing goes for Mikasa. She spent years and years protecting Eren and fighting by his side. Day after day, just hoping that Eren would stop. I think the lyrics in Under the Tree illustrate that very well. The Curse of Ymir might not bring about Eren's death directly, but as soon as they learn of it, it's hard to argue that it also doesn't cause his death. And this is where things begin to get progressively weirder and more complicated. Eren doesn't even respond. In the same monotone voice, he just keeps going. He explains how if a Titan Shifter dies through natural means, the Titan will be reborn into a random Eldian. This just very neatly covers up a whole myriad of questions. For example, how have all the Titans been perfectly passed down, and how has no one ever inherited 2, just like Eren? If anyone were to get 2 Titans, they're effectively locked away. The next inheritor, they will also inherit 2 Titans, right? So the only way to split them up is a natural death. Realistically, that should have happened over the course of 2,000 years, right? Well, yes, even if it did happen, they might have passed away naturally, and the Titans would have once again been split up. Thematically, though, it's that same exact theme of inheriting a war that has nothing to do with you. For some reason, you are born with a Titan, and suddenly you are the enemy of the world. It's literally just bad, or I guess very good depending on how you look at it, but I think pretty bad Spawn RNG, and that's about it. But okay, all of that's not worthy of the Reiner reveal motif, definitely not. What is more than worthy of it, though, is Eren taking the pose of Eren-Kruger and looking to his right. This is Memory Soup Eren, because he is no longer getting his dad's memories. He is Kruger, and who knows what point in time Kruger. I think the reason why we get the very familiar Reiner wall reveal motif is because this is yet another reveal happening right in front of our eyes. This is Eren setting Grisha on his path. It's him blatantly starting this story without us even realizing it. And somewhat ironically, because he's kind of cosplaying Kruger right now, he then goes on to talk about how all Eldians are connected through the paths. Something we actually already saw with Ymir in Season 2. But he then says that they all converge on the coordinates, aka
the Founding Titan.
Some of you have already noticed that I deliberately use this frame when talking about the whole memory shenanigans, and yeah, this isn't a thing I've made for the sake of conveying a point. This is an actual frame in the episode. That's not Kruger talking to Grisha, that is literally Eren. In any other show, you'd clearly just assume that, oh, it's just a cheeky transition, because, it's the same lore happening on both sides, right? But this is not any other show, and that's why we have the Reiner motif right here. Just like Reiner just randomly reveals himself, we have Eren doing the same exact pose, saying the same exact things, and quite literally fading to the same conversation atop the wall. Those are not cheeky parallels, that's what's actually happening. The end of this episode, of course, makes that very clear, with Kruger explicitly asking, whose memories are these? But with things like even Hanji roasting Eren for being weird, the show is actively trying to bonk us over the head that, no, what you're watching, this is not just a funny goofy, that's what's going on. This is a predetermined loop of memories being shown to us in real time. I know I'm saying it a lot today because all the big stuff happens at the end of this episode, but hold that thought for now. Grisha then asks who the founder Ymir really was. Kruger very blatantly says that to Marley, she's a devil, to Eldia, a god. And then casually drops the line of, some merely think of her as a young lady who made contact with the source of all organic life. Which, yeah, Kruger, funny you say that, because that is an awfully accurate guess. So the question once again arises of, is this Eren just literally telling us who Ymir is? Or is this really just a tale that was passed down through generations and somehow remained accurate? But then again, Ymir, she was alone, and coming up with something like the source of all living things, let's be honest, that's just impossible. That is very, very random. So this also couldn't really be a made-up story. It's just too accurate. I think there's also a lot you could speculate around the long-term implications of this entire speech. Kruger talking about how anyone can become a god or a devil so long as enough people believe it seems like a bit of a warning, as well as just foreshadowing Eren's fates. So perhaps you could interpret this as Eren trying to change his own story? Or maybe the exact opposite, realizing the futility of that. Who knows, but it's definitely interesting to think about. Also, I really want to keep bringing this up for like every other shot, but the background art for this episode is gorgeous. The constant visual contrasting of Kruger and Grisha being quote-unquote free in the midst of this cruelty, while Eren is locked up, but also right atop the wall, is excellent. I think it perfectly sets us up for Eren's rude awakening once they actually reach the sea. Grisha then asks about Dina, asking whether just like Ymir, the whole royal blood thing is just made up. Kruger explains that it's not, and he let her be turned exactly because she's a royal. And most importantly for Eren's story, he then asks whether he'd really want to see her be forced to bear children for the enemy for the rest of her life. Firstly, there's the whole smiling titan must exist, timey-wimey fixed timeline stuff. So you can sort of read into this as Eren stepping in to stop Zeke from spilling the beans on their royal blood. In the long run, it'd be this exact point of contention and Zeke's royal blood that enables this conversation to happen in the first place. What I mean by that is that in order for Eren to send back memories to Kruger, he already needs to be the full Founding Titan, because he doesn't get the Attack Titan unless Grisha becomes the Founding Titan, and Grisha becomes the Founding Titan only because Eren is the Founding Titan. But number 2, this is the same exact mindset Eren would later have with Historia. Though we then get to one of the most powerful lines in the entire series that I think might as well be the unofficial second title of Attack on Titan. Grisha says that he doesn't think he's right for the job, only for Kruger to push him to stand up and saying that you're going to do it. And Grisha then responds with, "If I had known this would be the price for freedom, I wouldn't have paid it." And doesn't that summarize this entire story? What if Grisha had simply remained in Liberio? Yes, he was oppressed and life was not good. But I think we can all agree that his pursuit of freedom didn't result in a better life. His sister died, his wife died, he himself was shipped off to some alien society where his son from the literal future, that sounds so goofy to say, but it's true, it's his son from the literal future pushes him to commit countless more atrocities. I talk about it from Grisha's point of view, but for the 300th time in this series, this is the purpose of the Founding Titan. We get to see the purity of Eren, the hope for a better future for everyone, not just him. But we also see the irreversible tide of hatred and of humanity's collective cruelty. The entire fixed timeline stuff we see with both Eren and Grisha is essentially an exploration of the butterfly effect. Only because this is Attack on Titan, it's not one where oh wow, things are so different, I should have never messed with time travel at all. No, it's one that took their fundamental emotions and desires and locked them into it. Seemingly a single isolated incident of blaming a girl for letting the pigs escape their pen, of blaming a young boy and his sister for trespassing. They completely spiral out of control, and that kernel of hatred that started it all can never change. I always talk about how fantasy is just human drama wrapped up in a slightly shinier form. Eren, or Grisha, or Ymir, they're just representations of generational hatred personified in a single character. Grisha can say that he doesn't want this, Eren can say that he doesn't want this, but when has logic ever stopped hatred? Eren and Grisha are entire populations, but they are also individuals. That's the Founding Titan. And to overanalyze even further, we will, and to an extent already have, explored the other side of this whole freedom argument. Both the vow to renounce war and Zeke's euthanasia plan are essentially alternative means of stopping suffering, of not paying the price that Grisha wishes he never paid. Is the typical question of, we lived, but at what cost, and did we even live, or did we just survive? Zeke in Season 4 explores that question of, we survived, and maybe we shouldn't have. But because this is still the Attack Titan we're talking about, Kruger pushes him to stand up. He tells him to fight, and then he doesn't quite ask whether he has forgotten why he's here. Rather, he shows him a picture of why he's here. This is literally the Crystal Catacombs happening right in front of us. It's maybe not quite as deranged, but really, it's the same exact thing. And just like the Crystal Catacombs, it doesn't work. Grisha says that he has forgotten all that hate, and all that remains is guilt. But Kruger fires back saying, it's enough, because that is what fuels Eren. Guilt for something that hasn't even happened yet. Guilt that he can't stop it. But also guilt about how much suffering has already happened. The fact that he could never save his mother. The fact that so many of his allies are dead. Spite and guilt is more than enough. But to again loop back to that question of where this all began, Kruger says that had he not gone past the wall that day, he'd likely be living a happy life. But unlike with characters like Mikasa, where the phrase is, the world is cruel but also beautiful, for Kruger, there is none of that. That beauty is long dead for him. He doesn't entertain the scenario at all and immediately denies that dream, saying, you stepped outside of the wall. We focus on Grisha's green eyes as Kruger continues saying, until the day comes when the two of us get what we deserve, we can only move forward. Number 1, add another character who said fight or move forward in the same exact manner that Eren does. But more importantly, number 2, this, along with Kruger's next line of in death and even after, I think is the perfect encapsulation of what the Attack Titan is. We'll get to the actual mechanics in a second, but on a thematic level, what sets it apart from all the other shifters is that it doesn't entertain these hypothetical dreams. It never embodies any conflicting ideologies or self-contradictory beliefs. Its inheritance is never undermined by existing conflicts. For millennia, it has only moved toward one singular purpose. It is that bleak and fatalistic view of the world, their total abnegation that has made the Attack Titan the only one capable of forging its own line of succession. As far as we know, the Attack Titan has never been captured. Ever since the Great Titan War, it's just been somewhere. With every single one now leading up to Kruger, they have actively made the decision of who will get it next. And so, Grisha finally turns to the picture.
You chose to start this story.
This is one of the all-time greats in Attack on Titan, a scene that perfectly pulls off this ridiculous reveal through just basic dialogue, while also adding layers and layers of emotional baggage. This isn't just a big turning point or a moment of just raw hype. This is exponentially increasing the complexity of the story to such a degree that, well, it might as well be a totally different story altogether. Comparing the story of seasons 1 to 3 and then season 4, it's night and day, and this is the event that truly separates them. Which, by the way, I think that's why this scene happens during a sunset. And the music, oh man! This is the guitar version of Call Your Name, and in my brain, it immediately gives off that Death Note-esque or Kaiji-esque vibe. Which I think is a very good vibe to have, considering, like both of those series are all about big brain reveals, and, this is kind of a big brain reveal too. I love it. And speaking of reveals, let's get to the titular one. In every era, this is a Titan that has always marched steadily forward in pursuit of freedom, and he was willing to fight for the sake of that freedom.
The Attack Titan.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. I know 2 times is not as funny, but they name drop the entire series. I just gotta do it. Mistranslation of the title aside, let's finally talk about the widely discussed question of whether or not the Attack Titan can actually see future memories. The story clearly implies that it does, but over the years, many have argued that the future memories we see here is just the Founding Titan, since it ultimately ends up with Eren. For brevity's sake, I won't get into the many offshoots of this idea and just say that, personally, I do not subscribe to this idea. But I also think that the fundamental thought process behind it is exactly right. Let me explain. I think the power of the Attack Titan is to inherit future memories from future Attack Titans. However, I think it's that exact power that separates it from the causal loops that entrap the Founding Titan. Eren, because he has the Founding Titan, also exists in a causal loop and transcends time. But because he has the Attack Titan, when he reaches Ymir, they break the entire thing. For millennia, they march toward the goal of what is actually just liberating Ymir. Not because they're just immune from the Founding Titan, but rather because their future sight allows them to sort of create their own loop, if you will. On a conceptual level, I think the Attack Titan's future sight is meant to effectively nullify the Founding Titan's future sight, to fundamentally not allow the total capture of all Titans by a single party. That is why, again, the Attack Titan, it was never captured. From the very beginning, the Titans originated from Ymir's spirit to simply survive. So I think the Attack Titan is that primal drive to survive, even against its own peers and even across time itself. Its only goal was to fight for freedom, and for the freedom of its own creator, in this case, Ymir. It's the same reason why, again, I think the Titans as a whole cease to exist once the Founding Titan and the Attack Titan are used in conjunction. Both Eren and Grisha succumb to the mind-bending memory soup that is the Founding Titan, but the story they started kept moving forward with or without them. It was the Attack Titan as a concept that liberated the Founder from its own grasp. This is also why I think with these episodes, the question of causality is one that actually can't be pinned down. When we talk about Grisha and the Crystal Catacombs, for example, it's a very simple fixed loop where you can't entertain any what-ifs because it's all predetermined. As Zeke says, the past cannot change. Founding Titan Eren telling his dad to become the Founding Titan so that he can become the Founding Titan, that's a paradox and that's a loop. Literally everything around that can no longer change, from the Smiling Titan to Eren first activating the coordinates to everything we're seeing right now. All of it is predetermined because for Eren to become the Founding Titan in the first place, the whole conversation in Season 4 must exist. Here, on the other hand, it's a little murkier. On one hand, Kruger is talking like Eren, so in order for this conversation to even be possible, Eren must exist. He must possess the Attack Titan, which also immediately means the Founding Titan, and the loop goes on. But at the same time, it is impossible to really pin down the true point of causality. All of this stuff is very confusing and it's very easy to get lost in the sauce, but I think of Eren's influence on Kruger as almost a superposition. For a quick detour to quantum physics, I'm sure everyone's already heard of Schrödinger's cat, but it basically means that both states of the outcome exist at the same time until an observation is made. So with Schrödinger's cat, you put it in a box and it is both dead and alive until you open the box and actually look at it. Applying this to Kruger, I think he did have the chance to stop this causality because Grisha both is and isn't a successor and is and isn't sending back memories. But it's Kruger's acceptance of Grisha as a successor after what happened to his sister that instantly means that superposition has been observed, if you will, and in that same instance, Grisha becomes the Attack Titan and the Founder, and Eren becomes both the Attack Titan and the Founder. I know that was confusing, but we can sort of throw all of that out because it's also important to note that the line does end with Eren. In theory, that means this causality could have started with Ymir, which means that the Attack Titan line as a whole was always Eren's line. If what I said about its only purpose being to liberate the Founding Titan, well then everything in between is just noise. Ymir's spirit started this journey like, 1800 years ago, and the end is with Eren. Everything in between, no one really cares, it's all predetermined. Even the final movie is called The Last Attack, which to me does kinda imply that in the end, the Attack Titan was even more important than the actual Founding Titan. I don't know how much you should be looking into this entangled causality shenanigans, but I do think that thematically, as well as from an in-universe magic sense, it makes sense for the entire attack line to also be predetermined. Which is of course particularly ironic considering its entire story is about liberation and freedom. But then again, you could also argue that each quote-unquote observation is made independently, meaning that Grisha going beyond the walls wasn't actually a fixed event. In theory, we don't really know what kind of memories the attack line was getting and when those sort of observations are made.
Okay, that's enough. I'm gonna break the fourth wall. It's 1 AM. We're talking about time travel shenanigans, none of which actually affect the story. Help. Please.
What I'm getting at with all of this is just that disentangling the Founding Titan from the attack is simply impossible because they both end up with Eren. Both of those inheritance lines should in theory be his. In terms of the story as we see it though, I think Isayama simply needed the Attack Titan in order for Eren to get through to Kruger in the first place. Once the entire mission of recapturing the Founding Titan is set in motion, well, that sort of enables the rest of the story. Returning to said story though, Eren does a wacky pose that Hanji bullies him about, which is funny goofy, but what is this pose? Maybe overanalyzing has fried my brain a little, but I don't think there's any explicit connection between it and anyone else in the series. Especially considering the fact that he just mirrored Kruger. Exactly. Perhaps it's like a clue of a past Attack Titan? I genuinely have no idea, but considering how much attention is put on it and how much Eren insists that, oh, it's nothing, it certainly sticks out as odd. If you cranked up the yapping levels, maybe you could say that he's massaging his wrists, as in where chains would have been? I know he wasn't chained up, I'm talking about like symbolically. If you interpret the Attack Titan as the liberator of the Founder, it does kinda make sense, right? We just talked about breaking those chains and freeing Ymir. He just revealed the Attack Titan. Maybe. After Levi memes around for a little bit, which, by the way, all of these moments of Hanji and Levi clowning on Eren for being weird, I think is there to deliberately, well, be weird. It is an extremely explicit way of telling us as the audience that, no, what you just saw wasn't a mistake or something to overlook or whatever. Something weird is going on with Eren, and we have never seen that before. But anyway, after that, Eren notices that Mikasa has lost weight. After learning that both he and Armin are ticking time bombs, she is understandably depressed and just stops eating. Like I mentioned earlier, this is why I think all of this imprisonment is more so meant to convey Mikasa's isolation above everything else. Because she's an Ackerman, of course she's not going to vocalize any of it, but Eren does note that, hey, you've lost some weight, is everything alright? Which clearly it isn't. Even though it doesn't really make any sense whatsoever for her to noticeably lose weight over the course of, what, a few days? But okay, I'll let it slide for the sake of conveying a message. We then cut to Historia reading the Ymir letters that Reiner brought. As is always the case with them, it's all super wholesome and also very, very sad. With Ymir saying that her only regret is that she didn't get to marry her. But outside of all the character implications, it sparks a whole new mystery of how these memory things even work. Historia touches the letter and sees the entire Ymir flashback we saw in Season 2, as well as Porco inheriting her Titan in Marley. Something that's not even an Ymir memory. That said though, I do think this is one of those times where you kind of throw away all analysis because it does kind of just seem like a scene to give us closure, and that's about it. None of this ever introduces some other variable that affects the rest of the story beyond things that we already knew. We knew Ymir went with Reiner, and we saw them talk about the whole inheritance angle already. So while you could spin up theories about how Ymir had like a deeper connection with the Pads because she spent so long there, and maybe her and Historia had this very, very strong bond, I do think this is a scene for us as the audience and not so much the plot, if that makes sense. As we talked about way back in Season 2, their story is just abruptly cut short. So this is, I think, just a tiny, and quite painful bit of closure. And I think that is doubly true considering it also reminds us that these memory shenanigans, they even exist, and it would be very important in just a little bit. This cutaway to Sasha just casually crunching on an apple is glorious though. We then get to the super secret briefing, much of which is just recap of everything that's happened in Season 3. This is the penultimate episode after all. This is just a neat way to tie everything together and set us up for what comes next. But this is Attack on Titan, so that doesn't mean that we're also not going to get some massive developments here. Much like with Eren earlier, Hanji and Kruger's explanations continue to be mirrored as they say that if Marley were to get the Founding Titan, they'd wipe out the Eldians for good. Grisha initially protests saying that the king would never let it happen, but Kruger fires back saying that he wouldn't do anything. The rumbling was a bluff and a tool of deterrence, something we literally already saw with Reiner's and Bertholdt's first attack on Shiganshina. Yes, Grisha did kinda sorta immediately yoink the Founding Titan, but still, we know full well that Frida was never going to retaliate in any form. And this is also where a whole different debate is brought up. We flash back to Kenny as he talks about the naive promise he sold to people. This short-sighted dream of taking away their memories and letting them live in this ignorant bliss. As we know from, well, this story, that obviously didn't work. But the thing I've always found really interesting with the vow to renounce war is how it embodies that same theme of inheritance despite being this idyllic form of ending war. He wanted to break the cycle of inheriting the Titans, but really, it's the same exact thing with just a slightly different skin. We've talked plenty about the Titans being this manifestation of the past generation's hatred, but for Fritz, that guilt and hatred was internalized to such a degree that he allows his own people to be torn apart. When you really sit down and think about it, it is incredibly self-serving. The only thing this vow of peace achieves is stroking his own ego, because no, the people of the walls didn't do anything wrong and they don't need to be absolved of anything. Let's not bring in Eren because, Titan shenanigans, but let's just talk about Armin. What did he ever do to deserve any of this? Did he deserve to lose his parents, his grandparents, to just end up alone? The vow of peace is the most selfish, wannabe martyr move possible because he wouldn't be suffering the consequences of that decision now, would he? He just gets to chill in the paths, I guess, just thinking that he cleansed them. While in reality, his peace caused hundreds of thousands of his own people's deaths. This whole narrative of, oh, our ancestors did so many bad things, so I will just let my own people be torn apart. That's not peace. That's just being dumb. Like, to a certain extent, that is unironically worse than what Marley is doing to Eldians. And so, Kruger drops the line of, a king who doesn't protect his people is no king at all. But the thing is, in the long run, we also know that their mission of protecting their people didn't work. I mean, even on Paradis, it was borderline a civil war. We'll of course be talking plenty about how a potential peace could have been achieved in Season 4, but much like Kruger himself said earlier, the truth is right in the middle. A true king is not one who will play some god and decide people's fate according to his own ideology, nor is he one who will become the devil of all earth to destroy all opposition. A true king, or queen who may or may not be named Historia, is capable of reason. What complicates matters is Eren, because, But speaking of Eren, in the present day, remember that this is still the Eren who largely just wants to wipe out all the Titans because he believes that would solve their problems. And so, as they're talking about royal blood, he suddenly jolts up, almost blurting out the realization that the key to activating the Founder is royal blood. But then, the realization hits him. And as everyone turns to him asking, what's wrong, he just mutters it's nothing, and sits back down. Number one, just like with the weird hand thing and weird pose earlier, it establishes the fact that, from this point forward, Eren will be hiding things. He knows things that he doesn't think anyone else should know, and those things, well, it will lead him astray. But more importantly, this is basically Kruger and Dina 2.0. In Eren's mind, he remembers activating the Founder when he came in contact with Dina. The royal blood is the key. Historia is sitting right in front of them. That's it. They've won. Marley could be toast this evening. But then, the realization. What would Paradis do to Historia? If she must be sacrificed for the island, that's one hell of a trolley problem. And that is what the rest of Eren's story is all about. He absolutely will not sacrifice Historia, and he will not allow her to inherit any of the Titans. Like he himself would say later, he wants them to live long lives. He doesn't want any of them to suffer the Curse of Ymir. And also note that, when he thinks about Historia, we don't punch in on her. Rather, the focal point are the Wings of Freedom, just like they were with Grisha when he first arrived to the island. I think it's this visual cue that Eren's, or really the Attack Titan's stance, is a principled one. He doesn't care about victory and freedom on a conceptual level. He cares about freedom on an individual level. Yes, they could achieve total independence of Paradis at this very moment, but that would also mean taking away Historia's independence. Earlier in the season, we already talked about the similarities between them and how both of them have this forced inheritance upon them. Eren knows very well what it means to have your individuality stripped away, and so he simply refuses that completely. He doesn't tell anyone about this realization, not even Armin or Mikasa. And side note, this is also why I think any arguments about Historia's child actually being Eren's is high-key dumb and contradictory to both Eren's and Historia's characters. And to finish off this episode, we cut back to Kruger and Grisha atop the wall, with the ED music slowly fading in. As I think all of us know very well by now, when the ED fades from the episode into the ED itself, yeah, you will be left with your mouth slightly agape. Kruger begins with some philosophical talk about how he should start a family and live a normal life, adding that someone else down the line might be seeing this. This is obviously in reference to the whole memory inheritance angle, but even in a more abstract sense, I think you can also view it as history in general. Who knows what this paragraph in the history books will look like? Someone down the line will see this moment and perhaps draw completely different meanings from it. But it's those next lines that I think define the 5D writing of Attack on Titan and what made it such a wild journey to follow. It begins with the philosophical talk of just starting a family and trying to break this miserable cycle. But in that same breath, as if it was just a totally normal follow-up, he then says, if you want to save Mikasa, Armin, and everyone else, you must complete your mission. And in that instant, everything changed. Because there's a little discrepancy. It'd be a decade until they were even born. This is not someone down the line watching memories. This is someone down the line making them. And that sudden moment of disbelief in his own voice as he just asks,
I don't know. They aren't from my memories.
This is, in the purest meaning of the word, perfect direction. Luckily, I also have the perfect video to describe my reaction because, like, seriously, this was me. It just throws this perplexing sentence at you and is just like, yeah, you know what, I think we're actually done for today, which, not cool. With a single sentence, it adds a whole unseen layer to the entire story. It makes you reevaluate basically everything that has happened and will happen. Eren's dream in episode 1. This scene makes it clear that it wasn't just foreshadowing or setting the tone or anything like that. That happened. He literally saw the future. And even more than that, he didn't even have the Titan yet. With surprising certainty, you can begin to speculate about how this story, it might be a loop. If it wasn't, those memories, they surely would have changed the future, right? And the final thing to note in this episode is the ever so slightly special ED. This one doesn't really have anything like super new or anything like that. Most of these things we've already seen in the previous episode as well as before. Like I've said before, I will eventually come back to analyze all the EDs separately just so we can really dive into them. But with this one, and especially when you look at the actual Season 3 ED, I think it brings up this really interesting conversation of, again, stripping away their individuality. The original ED has those like Polaroids of these warm memories. This one, on the other hand, is suddenly all about this great Titan war and these godlike beings. So I think if you look at it from the point of view of the Attack Titan, much like we just talked about, it sort of embodies that sense of Eren, Grisha, and Kruger, they are not individuals, they are the Attack Titan. All of those warm memories, all of those places that meant so much to him, they mean nothing, they are empty. The only thing that matters is to keep moving forward, all the way through the Great Titan War and all the way through to this story. Again, plenty more to say on all of this, but let's also not forget the fact that it is just supposed to be, a cool thing. We just got this abstract, nonsensical line, and so the ED suddenly pivots the story to something completely different. 10 out of 10, no notes. But with that, that is episode 58. Another absolutely massive one, and yes, before you ask, I did skip the mid-card because we have to use our time wisely and it really doesn't say anything important, but there it is. The 9 Titans. I had to use the power of the 9 to make sure this video gets done in time. There it is. The 9 Titans. Considering the fundamental shift we're about to see in the story, I have thought about doing like some sort of mega live stream or another mega video going over season by season of all the things I sort of missed, or maybe want to talk about again, so do let me know whether you want to see something like that. I will return to the earlier episodes at some point eventually, but I don't know if I want to do that now, or maybe later on. Point is, Overanalyzing is just going to keep on trucking along. And I guess speaking of, let's keep on trucking along, because next time, it is time for the end of Attack on Titan as we knew it so far. So, I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. The yapping levels are already catastrophic, so I'll just say all of my links are in the description along with the merch store, which might get something very, very interesting very, very soon. Other than that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.